Hi, I'm Chris Drury.
Hello, I'm Tom Mylander. We're partners at Edina Realty of Rochester, Minnesota.
This is the first episode of our mini-series, and this one we're going to be talking about what we have found to be one of the most important aspects to our clients when looking to purchase their home. And that is, how much money down am I going to need, and what is my monthly payment going to look like in order to get into this new house?
Well, I think the down payment is an obstacle that is not that difficult to overcome. There's so many programs out right now, but 5% down is typical, and if a $250,000 home were acquired, that's $12,500. That seems intimidating, but if you're a first-time home buyer, it can be as low as $1,000 out of pocket for your initial investment or down payment. Rural housing, if you're willing to look at some of the surrounding communities, they're eligible for federal financing in that area with absolutely zero down.
What are some of those communities as an example, Tom?
Well, Stewartville, St. Charles, Pine Island, Byron, Casson, very attractive bedroom communities with easy access to Rochester, or if you work somewhere else, like St. Charles, for instance, we get Winona people and Rochester people.
Sure. But you're not having to drive an hour just to get this
No.
0% down.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So, the money down, I mean, more traditionally, what are we looking at?
Well, using 5% down as a benchmark is $12,500 on the example of $250,000 home purchase. But a lot of people don't realize that entire amount can be gifted from family members. It can be, there are ways to borrow the down payment. You have to conform to the lender's guidelines, and it has to be borrowed through a secured asset, which we can discuss, which could be a 401k, it could be an automobile, or it could be a gift from your family member, as I previously mentioned.
Okay.
So don't let the down payment ever be an obstacle. There's ways to secure that without having to come up with the entire amount out of pocket.
Sure. Okay. So when we talk about what goes into having to pay for a new house initially, we also have closing costs, right?
Yeah. Closing costs typically run close to 3% or more of the purchase price.
Okay. And what do closing costs? What do they mean?
Well, there's some we call them junk fees involved, which the lender often will take a commission. But aside from that, that's true of all the lenders. But there's mortgage registration tax. There's some prepaid things that are in those closing costs that you can't get around. For instance, your homeowner's insurance has to be paid 1 year in advance. A certain percentage of your property taxes have to be paid in advance. And so that's all part of your closing costs. Recording fees with the courthouse, title work by the attorneys or the title company, all necessary to make your transaction go smooth.
Okay. And those usually around about 3% or so?
Depending on the loan amount, it's not a bad example to use. 3% is what I would use as an overall average.
Okay. So you have your down payment for the loan, which would go anywhere from the examples we used from 1% up to about 5%, and then of course the more the better. So if you get into 20, you get to avoid some additional fees every month.
Yeah.
And then you have the additional closing costs that are on top of that, are sort of a one-time payment. Are there creative ways that we can get away from having to come up with that 3% in closing costs now?
Well, generally speaking, the closing costs you're not going to get around if you're taking a loan out, a mortgage. And just using that as an example, 3% on a $250,000 sale is $7,500. That's a lot of cash. So in addition to your $12,500, you'd have to have $7,500, which is $20,000. But without going over all these numbers, $7,500, in my opinion, is always better to add to your mortgage. So when you negotiate with a seller, have the seller pay your closing costs, even if you have to pay $7,500 more for the property, because it only increased your monthly payment $38 a month, and you got to preserve the $7,500 hard-earned cash, which can be used for other things.
TV,
Yeah.
new furniture.
Or some people, if their investment portfolio, like their 401k, is earning 10%, you're borrowing money at 4.5%.
Always the more responsible one,
Yeah.
Tom. Always the more responsible one.
Well, I always say borrow the money when it's cheap, and right now mortgage money is about as cheap as we're going to see it. The federal government is encouraging rate increases over the next few years, and so I think it's a really great opportunity at 4.5%.
Gotcha.
Especially when credit cards are 18% or more sometimes.
So you had mentioned negotiation between the realtors to see if we can't have those closing costs either covered by just the original offer or maybe an increase in the purchase price of the home.
Right.
I imagine it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation, right?
No, absolutely. Ideally, you make an offer that you think is fair and then throw in the caveat that the seller pay those closing costs up to 3%. Sellers, if they're motivated to sell, we don't know that sometimes until we get dialogue going, but if they're motivated enough, they'll pay your closing costs. And a successful realtor representing the buyer will negotiate that on your behalf.
Sure, okay. So then we get into the monthly payment, right? So this is what you're going to be saddled with for the next 30 years or however long it takes for you to pay off the loan. How does that breakdown usually work, Tom?
Well, on a $250,000 sale price, if you did put the $12,500 down, now assuming you didn't borrow any of that $12,500 and have to pay it back, your loan would be $237,500. That is a payment of about $1,203 a month. You would add, in that example, $300 to $400 a month for taxes, insurance, and private mortgage insurance, which we'll talk about in the next presentation, how to get around private mortgage insurance, which in this case represents about $144 of that $1,600 a month payment. And these are just examples, but they're pretty close to accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the important thing is if you're paying $1,600 a month for a $250,000 house, how does that value compare to renting? And I have not seen one instance where renting was better than owning.
Sure.
You will own the home for less than you would renting. And of course you have the added benefit of appreciation and future value.
And I think what we covered here in the last 5-10 minutes was we shouldn't let down payment or closing costs be something that holds us back from moving forward buying our house.
Oh, absolutely. I find that in doing this for over 20 years, that when the buyers understand their down payment requirement is surmountable, it makes the process much more enjoyable, more relaxed, and easy. So if you're renting, especially if you're renting, it behooves you to come see Chris or I to talk about strategies into getting into your home.
Well, now that we know how to afford it, we got to go find something that you like. So,
Yeah.
as Tom mentioned, get a hold of us and we'll find you a home that you love.